Hello and welcome to On Poverty, a special program brought to you by CGTN and the South African Broadcasting Corporation, SABC. My name is Lucien. I'm host of The Point on CGTN. Now, the world's extreme poverty rates have been cut by half since 1990. However, in today's world, 1 in 5 people in the developing world are still living in poverty, and the majority of them live in Asia or Africa. That is why, for the first time in China's TV history, we're talking about poverty on an intercontinental level. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm round of applause to my co-host from SABC, Liane Manas.
Shin, thank you very, very much, and a very warm welcome to all of you that are tuning in for this special broadcast, a very important broadcast, something that, as Shin highlighted, we as a world have made great strides against poverty. But if you look at Africa, there are still about 400 million people that are living below the poverty line, and something urgent needs to be done. I think to start this particular broadcast, one of the best quotes I can think of is from our former President Nelson Mandela. As long as poverty, injustice, gross inequality persist in our world, none of us can truly rest. So today we are going to do anything but rest, and we have got an amazing panel that are here to discuss some of those issues with us, and let me introduce them to you one by one. First up, let's give a very warm welcome to Bill Bicales, who is the Senior Development Economist with us.
Thank you.
Thando Nyawase, Economic Counselor for the South African Embassy in China. Professor Wenran Jiang, who is the Senior Fellow of the School of Public Policy and Global Affairs at the University of British Columbia. And finally, wrapping up this esteemed panel, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Michele Geraci, who is the Head of China Program for the Global Policy Institute.
The warmest applauses to all our panelists, and of course here in the studio with us are project managers who are experienced in poverty reduction, as well as other people who are interested in this subject. Now, the format of this show is like this. We will have numerous speakers who will come and share their personal encounter with poverty and their fight against it. Each will be followed by a panel discussion with these panelists. But before we invite our first speaker, let's take a look at the face of poverty in today's world. Let's welcome our first speaker, Maingania Raymond Neluvhalani.
Hello everyone. I know poverty. I did not read about it in the books or watched TV. I experienced it growing up myself. I believe I also chose a career, social work, as a caring profession so that I should help other people, uplift them to and better their lives. I was personally raised in a family of 8 siblings, and we were left under the care of my maternal grandmother because my father was a migrant laborer. We shared a 1-bedroom house. I slept on the floor until I was 14. There are many people who are still suffering the same situation of having houses that are not properly built. If you look at this picture, you can imagine how much water comes in when it's raining and how much hot it can be during summer. This reminds me of a picture that cannot be erased in my head. One night it rained so bad that water came into our house, both from underneath and a leaking roof. We had to leave the house to go and check if the outside roundabout kitchen could be dry for us to sleep in. I know what it is to eat after having to go out and hunt for insects like locusts, enjoy pap with termites, and go into the river to catch fish with a sackcloth. Poverty exposes people to a lot of painful situations. I would like to share another story, a very painful story of a young woman. This lady is called Nyerisani. She was brought up in a poverty situation also, but her poverty was more intense after she escaped a brutal attack. She dated her boyfriend to the bush because there's no way they could afford to go to a decent place like a motel. While they were there, they were attacked by people who were believed they wanted to mutilate them to get body parts. It is believed that in some cultures, body parts can be sold to witch doctors for traditional medicine. This lady stayed in the hospital for a while. She was treated and discharged. Unfortunately, the family could not afford to pay for proper plastic surgery that could bring her beautiful face back to normal. We interviewed her sometimes. She got the courage to manage to face life, and she can speak about a situation now. She has since dropped out of school, therefore she cannot secure any formal job. Her poverty is continuing with her life, and she can't do any manual labor. She needs help. There are many others. Poverty is real. Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. Thank you very much. Indeed, it's a heart-wrenching story. Unbelievable that people would be falling victim to poverty by other people who are driven by poverty to do incredible things. According to the United Nations statistics, as I said at the beginning of this program, a lot of people in the developing world are living in poverty. The total number is estimated to be 770 million. And we're talking about the international poverty line of living by less than $1.9 a day. Professor Jiang, let me ask you this question first. Why are Asia and sub-Saharan Africa so affected by the problem of poverty?
Well, this is a very complex situation and a complex world. I just want to say to the opening, very glad to see the two TV stations join hands to do this program. I mean, the story we just heard is amazing. And simply backing to your point that sub-Saharan Africa is a large population base, so is South Asia. The other big base is China. But China has done extremely well in the past few decades. But now you're looking at whether a long-proclaimed free market can do the poverty reduction. The China model may say differently. And now you have population bases in different parts of the world that has governance issues, have infrastructure issues, education issues. Some of them do not have a very strong central government to implement policy. Others are war-torn. So the issues are complex, but at the end of the day, we see bigger populations, bigger problems, very diversified geographical and economic backstage, but they share something in common. All very poor in the background, very inefficient in many management levels.
Yeah. Mr. Geraci, from your research and investigation, what had become different in these two continents in their approaches towards fighting poverty?
I think one of the reasons why we still have poverty in those areas and why not in China is, other than the strong government, the management of population. And in some other cases, population growth, of course, increases the economy of the country, but it vastly reduces the income per capita, because the denominator grows more than the number above. And this, in my view, has been one of the reasons why we have failures in Africa and in the part of Southeast Asia and not in China, where China has successfully managed the population numbers and has kept not just the GDP of the country growing, but also the GDP per capita.
I would like to ask the South African version of the story. I'm sure, yes, there are many challenges, but African countries are also trying their best, right, to tackle this problem. Mr. Niawaze, from the South African perspective, what are some of the progress you have made in fighting poverty and where the road is still lying ahead?
We've made vast advances in terms of eradicating poverty, not only just alleviating it. For instance, poverty thrives where people are less educated. We've invested lots of our money into education, from basic education even to tertiary education. Education alone takes about 20% of our national budget. It's a huge, of course, it's what we have achieved in the past 23 years. Now the challenge that lies ahead is to make that education, that money, to be well spent, because it's clear that despite the money that we've been spending on education, the results have not been as bright as we expected. Second, on housing, for the past 23 years, government has offered what we call housing opportunities to around 15 million people. Of course, because of the limited budget of our government, housing opportunity includes clearing up land for people to be able to build on their own, building what I call RDP houses. But of course, these are challenges that can never be resolved in just one generation.
It may help a little bit, but there has to be more. I mean, you talk about education, and it is a big thing. I mean, South Africa has invested, I think, more than the US and Britain in education, as you say, and yet it's not working. Something is wrong, because education, we've seen it happen in China here, it can be the key to getting out of the situation you find yourself in. Can I ask that question to you? How do we better educate our people? Maybe learn from the Chinese example.
Well, as we acknowledged, just putting the cash in is a start. It's essential. There are many countries that don't even invest the required amount of money in education. But then, of course, the question is how to improve the quality of the education and how to improve the inclusiveness of the education. Because what often happens is you set up a system, you set up a school, but you don't deal with the fact that the children aren't coming. The parents can't afford to send the children. There are other costs involved. So you need to invest, you need to find ways to make it inclusive so that even poor children will attend. Sometimes that involves giving some cash to the families, so on the condition that the children come to the school and keeping track of that. And it involves constant upgrading of the quality of education. It's a challenge in China as well. I mean, rural education in China, this is a high priority for the government now, with very good reason, because you want it to be more than just primary school. As your economy grows, you need quality education at middle school and high school levels as well.
And certainly when you talk about the money, and that's something I know we'll discuss a little bit later on in the program, is the fact that you may allocate the money and you may give the money, but is it going to the right people? And is it going to the cause as opposed to the corruption that the professor spoke about a bit earlier? But we will talk more about that. But I think at this time, let's introduce our next speaker. And with poverty, comes very difficult livelihoods. And the reality is we're going to talk about the subject of dignity and poverty now. Our next speaker is an NGO practitioner who's been supporting local communities in China, in Southeast Asia, and Africa for the last 18 years. Let's welcome Mr. Peng Bin.
Hello everyone, my name is Peng Bin. I work for a leading international humanitarian and development agency called Radiocor. I have been working in the aid sector for 18 years. The most exciting part of my work is understanding local needs and working with local expertise to design solutions together. However, my story shows how difficult understanding local needs can be, even for veterans like myself. I was on an assignment in northern Uganda, staying in a small town called Kigom. One morning, I left my hotel to see more of the area. When I passed the small mud road, I noticed that some women were preparing the first meal of the day in a shared cooking shed. I saw one woman putting some mashed food in her cooking pot. The cozy setting was just so interesting to me, and I wanted to capture this picture. So I grabbed my phone and took a shot. One of the women immediately noticed this gesture and asked, "Did you ask for my permission to take a picture of me?" To be honest, her quick response surprised me, and it was embarrassing. She was so confident to give her opinion. She was certainly not afraid of a confrontation. I deleted the photo and showed her that it was gone. Her smiling face seemed to say that she understands that I was just interested to take that photo. I didn't mean any offense. I was very much reminded of how important it was for us not to make any assumptions in any situations, no matter how much we think we know. I had taken many photos in villages before, but had never experienced this type of situation. Respecting local needs has been always a guiding principle for my approach. But this encounter seemed to tell me that why respecting local communities, hearing their opinions, and preserving dignity is so important. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peng. Thank you.
Mr. Bin, thank you very much. And I think when you hear of the stories and the work that Mr. Bin is doing, there's one quote that comes to mind. The poverty of being unwanted, unloved, and uncared for is the greatest poverty. And I think Mother Teresa said that. And I think what Mr. Bin is doing is he is caring, he is trying, and yet you have to be careful not to cross the boundaries. You need to understand where these people are coming from.
Yeah, and in different countries, in different continents, the reaction will be different, right? In China, probably nobody would be bothered, and they probably think, okay, now I get more attention, maybe there will be more help to me.
Exactly. So, Mr. Geraci, in your opinion, I mean, how would you think would be the best way to gather information and yet still keeping that person's dignity to make the world aware?
It's a difficult question because, for example, the picture that the gentleman deleted, of course, it was out of respect for the lady. In a way, there could be more of a Darwinian approach to this problem, and maybe the sacrifice of an individual and maybe slightly hurting the individual and maybe showing the picture today could have given, could have risen the reaction of many other people that would have been compelled to contribute a little bit more. And so, in a way, it's a tough balance to decide whether to invade the privacy of the person or use that personal story to make the story more public. And that's what we do normally in the media. We do, in a way, use, in a good way, hopefully, a personal story. And when we have earthquake, we have wars, and And the images that we see here, we probably didn't ask all these people, but they do help not just the show here today, but hopefully when people will watch the show on and on, they will continue watching these pictures behind, and they could think of the stories and be led to do something.
Yeah, may I interrupt here? I think the important message, one of the other important messages that Mr. Peng was sending is also to find a solution that suits the local circumstances, maybe, besides the embarrassment factor. Mr. Jiang, how important it is to respect the local circumstances to come up with tailor-made poverty reduction solutions?
Well, it's absolutely essential. We have a tradition, I would say, old colonial, new colonial, whatever, the attitude some people, aid agencies used to think. Now it's better, but used to think we're giving you aids and we come, you just do what we tell you to do. In fact, the story now we just heard, the first story is when you are poor and starving and extreme poverty, you lose human dignity. You're totally insecure, right? But on the other hand, people do have pride. And I traveled through Africa. One of the stories in southern Congo, Lumumbashi, I see a poor family of 6 kids, my good friend. They don't have enough to eat. They have to get government handout church, but they want to have a cell phone. They want to share a cell phone between 4 or 5 kids. They want to be connected to the world. What that tells us, you need to kind of using local inspirations, aspirations of their own, and maybe help them to do their own living and lifting themselves out of poverty.
Mm. You know, the story that we heard is not a unique story in the African continent. I mean, I've traveled. I've also done the same, taking pictures, and yet the people don't like that. They don't like being taken advantage from in any way. They have the right to have their dignity. But you need to get that message out there at the same time. And the NGOs working in these communities, how should they be helped by government and the states? Because the work that they do is vital in uplifting these communities.
Yes. 2 things on that. For NGOs absolutely have a vital role to play because they get down at the grassroots level and they relate on a personal level in a way that some of the larger organizations don't. On the photo question, if I could go back to that, because I worked at UNICEF for a number of years also, and I would emphasize one thing, and that is everyone loves seeing children. Everyone loves taking pictures of children. Children have the right and the dignity that has to be respected also, and people should be very careful about taking photos of children, engaging with children without permission, without parents, without other adults.
Mr. Bicales talked about the dignity of children, and our next speaker is actually a caring mother who loves not only her own children, but also a number of children that have been abandoned, fostered, and orphaned. And I'm not just talking about 1 or 2 or 3 or 5. There are a total of 26. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give it up for Ella Mahlulo.
Greetings to everyone. I grew up in a very poor background, raised by a single mother who was alcoholic. I started to work at the very age on the farm to make sure we have a place to stay. I dropped out of school and I work on the farm full time because there was nobody to pay for my schooling. When I was still working on the farm, one of the ministers from the Baptist church rescued me and he helped me to go back to school again. And when I finished school, I started to work as a dishwasher, kitchen assistant, a waiter, domestic worker. Then I ended up working in the office. While I was working in the office, I had a dream of starting my own business. And through that business, I can start my own NGO to help children in my community. The business is a tourism business in Knysna. And we cater all the tourists which are coming through the Western Cape. And through the business, we're able to help the children in the community of Knysna, which I will make one example of beauty. Beauty came to my care at the age of 1 year. She was very neglected, and she was one of the children, which was my first time to see a child with no smile, even if you tickle the child. I used to embrace her, and there will be no response when I embrace Beauty. Then, during that process of having Beauty in that, trying to make all means to get the character and the attitude and the happiness and the joy to Beauty as a child, my husband proposed to me. When he proposed to me, I know for all the girls it's something that is nice, but I have to be sure, more than anything, that I marry the right companion, someone who's going to have the same heart as I do, especially for the children in need. I invited him to come before I say yes, and he came, and that is when he met with Beauty, and the smile that you see now on Beauty's face is the smile that we first saw when my husband came into my house. Then I married the guy for sure. And then Beauty started to come out, and she's still going to school, and she's doing very well in school. I believe because of my experience with poverty, the only way to fight poverty is through education. The minister did not have much money to take me to university, but he was able to rescue me to finish, at least to get my senior certificate, which I was able to secure a job, up to an office job, and I was able to start my own business and able to do most of the things in the business. And with the 26 children that we're taking care of, we are funding our organization through the business. And we also help a lot of children in the community, which are coming from different backgrounds. And our main thing is to bring back the dignity from the early child and bring up the positive attitude. Thank you.
Thank you, Ella. It's taken me a very long trip to get to Beijing to hear about Ella, all the way from South Africa. She's incredible.
Yeah, the story of Beauty, I'm sure, impressed us greatly. However, the situation with children in the picture of poverty is not very nice. I mean, poverty seems to disproportionately affect children more than any other age group. Almost half of the world's poor population are children, and that's the number of the ratio of children living in poverty is twice that of adults. Mr. Geraci, why are children so susceptible to poverty?
Because what we said before, the demographic pyramid, so the number of people divided by age group, it has a very large base in certain countries. And of course, the people with the youngest age represent a large part of the population. And so poverty is again directed, unfortunately, at those children, because families have a high fertility rate. And so there is a little bit of culture, there is a little bit of education issues. And I go back to the issue of China. Education is indeed, I think most of us would agree, is a solution. Unfortunately, education is a long-term proposition. And so we have what we call it a mismatch of maturities between what is the problem and what is the solution. And so China has done well by imposing the one-child policy while at the same time pushing for education. And in fact, we see now that once the one-child policy now has been lifted in China, people do not run around and have still more than 1.3 children. So the education has worked over the last 35 years, since 1982. And so maybe we were talking about, I think Bill was saying about paying families for sending children to school. Maybe we could pay families to keep the family size smaller. We would not want to go to the extreme of enforcing birth, but maybe subsidies for keeping children, 2, 1.5 per family, and that would make the number of children poor lower.
It's very interesting that you say this. Another thing that struck me during Ella's story is that she is helping these children with her own ability, capacity. She has a business, so she can help these people. Is her individual case, or there are many other people who are doing that? What about the role of the government versus the role of the individual there?
The government does have what is called child grants including for not only just for parents, even for non-parents, which are foster grants. It offers some money per month. I think it's around 800 rands, if I'm not mistaken. It might have increased a bit. It's not much money, but it does cover some basics. Secondly, most of the government schools are free. You don't pay. And of course, that is from basic education from grade 1 to 12. Of course, there's a big push to making even a higher education free. Of course, it's not affordable at the current moment, but government even at that level helps out a lot of children from poor families. There is some contribution from government, I think.
My worry is the issue of social grants, and Thando spoke about it earlier, in that we are, as a country, people are becoming more and more dependent on social grants. In fact, 17 million of our South Africans are now getting social grants. From your experience, you've worked with the UN, you look at the economics of countries. Is this sustainable? Can more and more people just become dependent on a state without the employment being there and without the actual change happening in their lives?
I think the international experience is pretty clear on that point. As a transitional step, transfers like that are necessary, because you don't want children to fall into the poverty trap. You don't want a child who's born into a poor household for whatever reason to then not be well fed, to not get an education. Then you're perpetuating poverty for more generations. So having a social assistance scheme where you're giving some support to poor households is essential, but you have to take care of the first things first, and that is you need inclusive economic growth. You need growth that reaches those households, that will be lifting them out of poverty. So cash grants are important. I wouldn't ever suggest just cutting them out, but you can't have a society in which they're your main way of alleviating poverty. In the end, inclusive growth, education and health services, those are the only ways that you can eliminate poverty sustainably.
You have been watching a special program on CGTN and SABC on poverty. We'll take a short break and we'll be back right after this. Stay with us.
I have to be sure, more than anything, that I marry the right companion, someone who's going to have the same heart as I do, especially for the children in need.
China's primary contradiction now is unbalanced and inadequate development with the people's growing need for a better life.
How should they be helped by government and the states? Because the work that they do is vital.
Government, even at that level, helps out a lot of children from poor families. There is some contribution from government.
Welcome back. This is a special broadcast on CGTN and SABC called On Poverty. Thank you very much for staying with us. So much more to come. In fact, this speaker, I think, is going to make you think quite a lot. He comes from Mali. He's here practicing traditional Chinese medicine. His nickname is the Barefoot Doctor. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Diarra Boubacar.
"17 years ago, I came across with barefoot doctors. These are people who had contributed to China development in the early 1950s. But as China developed more and more attention was given to Western medicine and to big hospitals. The barefoot doctor concept faded. These are people living in a remote area that lack medicine, that lack basic medical instruments. So I decided to do something for them. Tumei is one of my students. She's from a Hani tribe. She only has primary school education. She don't speak Chinese, she only speak honey. So during my training, I have to teach her, and another student have to translate to honey to her. But despite all these difficulties, at the end, she was able to manage and to take care of her community and become a welcome village doctor. Lu Han also was one of my best students. One day I received a call from the government that there was a lady suffering from stroke in the hospital and there was no cure for her. So I took Lu Han with me. I give her instruction how to take care of the patient. So Lu Han started giving acupuncture and herbal medication. After 3 weeks of treatment, the woman was able to walk. So sometimes our barefoot doctors can do what big hospital doctors cannot do. Li Nong was a smart girl. She grew up in a very poor family. So in the middle school, she was forced to quit school, get married, and then go to the city for labor work. But I need to find a doctor in the village. So I drive 5 hours in the mountain to find her among a mist of bricks. I convinced her to come back in the village and become a village doctor. And now she's a very respected village doctor. I left barefoot doctors spread all over China. What I have learned? Poverty is linked to healthcare and medicine. So to alleviate poverty, we need to bring healthcare to these poor villages in a very simple, sustainable way by using natural resources. Do one thing at a time and we'll make it. Thank you.
I love what he said is that sometimes the barefoot doctors can do more than an actual doctor can do for the community. They know the community, they live with the community, they understand the resources. And I'm going to swing right around and come straight here. How do you think we can more support and grow these traditional healers and these alternative methods as we've heard?
I think it's been an attempt was made in the early 90s to try and integrate them with the traditional doctors, with Western medical doctors. I don't think that project went very far. But it's clear that we have lots of very skillful traditional doctors. I think the first step will probably to try and professionalize their careers, because there are some of their herbal products that can cure some of the ailments that are troubling our societies. But they still remain at the rudimentary level. They have not been patented as well and turned into normal or ordinary pills like what the Chinese have done here. When you have flu here or other ailments, you go to the traditional Chinese pharmacy, you get Chinese medicine, but in a Western form, in a pill form, or even if it's some leaves as well. I think we still have a long way to go in terms of doing that. Probably it's something that we can, of course, take a lead out of what China has done. We haven't done much. Of course, on the positive side, though, in terms of access to health, our people who are poor have free access to our basic health services.
During the just concluded 19th Party Congress, the General Secretary of the CPC mentioned that China's primary contradiction now is unbalanced and inadequate development with the people's growing need for a better life. And I think that showcased that while you can see these high rises and absolutely fancy lifestyles in the big cities, in the countryside, in the mountainous areas, you still have these pockets of extreme poverty. Professor Jiang, what are the challenges ahead for China in this regard?
Well, this is a very good question. China, if we see China miracle in the past few decades, the single most important achievement is to lift huge, we're talking about hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. So that's kind of becoming the known fact. But the story now we hear is that China, because of its population base, even you live majority of these people out of poverty, still having a lot of people living in poverty. And I think the story taken away from the past few week and so on and so forth. The Chinese president just spoke recently in Vietnam saying to solve poverty issues in China still is President Xi's personal conviction. And now we're seeing not only China sending doctors abroad, but also we have barefoot doctors from Africa coming to China. It tells us really reducing poverty really has no national borders. It's a global effort, right? The other issue is if we have these kind of societal-based barefoot doctor, community service, if they have to function, they must have to function in a peaceful environment. In China's poverty areas, they're peaceful still, but in war-torn zones, in many of those parts in Africa, in these parts, they can't operate.
It's impossible.
And then you got a problem, right?
One final speaker.
Yes.
Yeah, one final speaker on this special program. I hope you are enjoying it as much as we are here, because these stories are moving, and yet I think they're creating examples for many people that are watching this of what you can perhaps do in your community as well. Our next speaker is going to be focusing on exactly what we've already been talking about, and that is the revitalization of rural areas. Jessica Jiang co-founded Rural Culture Renewal Volunteers Association, which works on poverty alleviation in rural vitalization in China.
I was raised in a small village in Hunan province in the 1970s. When I was a child, the village was very poor, without electricity, no tap water, no fancy toys. My most favorite toys are grasshoppers, hens, chickens, and ducks. When I went to the college, the villagers of my village all held my hand and said, "Now you are going to the city. You are going to be the star of our family and the hope of our village. And as for us, we are farmers without culture. Therefore, there is no future for us." Do farmers have no culture, and does the countryside have no future? This question pestered me for many years. And I gave it a second thought in the year 2003, when my beloved grandmother passed away in the village, and I went back to her 7-day traditional funeral. According to the local custom, all the villagers of my village should come to my home to have dinner for 7 days. And there were a lot of rituals, drama playing, sutra chanting, traditional games. To my astonishment, I realized that everything went on so smoothly, just like a very modern and highly organized company. Everybody was right in the right place and helping each other, and there was no written document, no long meetings. So I realized solidarity and community help is of great importance and part and parcel of rural culture. Later on, I became a cultural volunteer, and I brought many volunteers to different parts of Chinese villages. And wherever we go, we found that community help and solidarity is a very important part of rural culture, but it's often overlooked and underestimated. For thousands of years, Chinese villagers have lived together, worked together, and helped each other in times of need, no matter it's for disaster prevention or for helping each other in children raising or education. And this explains why coming together and well-motivated people can create miracles. In the 1960s, Chinese farmers created by their hands 80,000 reservoirs across China, the largest irrigation system of the world. And in the last 3 decades, apart from the policies and infrastructure, Chinese villagers helped each other for alleviating poverty. Apart from solidarity, Chinese villagers are also very smart and creative and very talented. During the years, we met with many farmers with great talent. Some of them are great chefs, great dancers, great singers, and great experts on animals and trees. So rural culture can actually become a treasure instead of just a burden. So do farmers have culture, and does the countryside have a future? My answer is yes. Poverty alleviation is not a one-way philanthropy. It's a two-way mutual learning process. The city should learn from the countryside, and the countryside should learn from the city. I hope in the future people can join hands and to vitalize the rural area again and make it the most beautiful, livable, and cultural place to be. Thank you.
I think it's such a wonderful topic and so beautifully put there, because it is so important. And I'm going to ask this to you, Mr. Geraci. What can we learn from that divide between the rural and the urban areas?
Well, it's an interesting topic. I am also the author of a documentary on China rural economy. This is not self-advertising, but it's actually to let people know that China obviously has a lot of heritage in the rural areas. What we're looking at was, for example, how the income disparity between the rural areas and the urban area was at the same time a problem, that we do not want to have income disparity, but on the other hand, a pull factor. The higher the income disparity, the more the average farmer had an incentive to leave and improve his wealth by living into the city and moving from the agriculture to the manufacturing or service sector in the city. So we also have this philosophical debate. What is the optimum level the income disparity should have between urban and rural areas? At the moment in China is about 2.8 times, 3 times. So the average rural person makes 12,000 renminbi per year. The average urban citizen makes 36,000 renminbi per year, 3 times. And we don't know yet what is the optimum level that a society can support in terms of making the agriculture and the rural economy self-sustained. At the moment, we don't have that yet. So we expect, for example, a larger flow of migrants still coming to the urban areas, 18, 20 million per year. And that depletion actually makes the average income for those who are left grow faster.
Mm-hmm. I think there's also an interesting shift of concept of people's impression of the countryside, right? As Jessica was talking about, when people talk about farmers, their impression is more or less negative, and that's why a lot of people kind of look down upon the farmers. How important is it for people to change their mindset and thinking rural areas doesn't equal backwardness?
Well, that used to be the case, right? The myth of this modernization paradigm is somehow, as we move towards more material wealth, modern style, everybody get urbanized. That's how people in North America, in Europe, in Japan have done. They all move into the urban centers because rural areas are backward. The story just told us. Now, China happened to be just over half of its population of nearly 1.4 billion urbanized. A long way to go if they want to urbanize the rest. What we're seeing now is a trend saying with the new technology, with the communication technology, with the internet, with the e-commerce, that people can actually appreciate their rural culture, their rural economy. They can use e-commerce to promote what they produce in rural areas and make rural areas catching up with the urban areas as much enjoying a modern lifestyle. I think these are paradigm shifts and they're new trends we should pay attention to. No country has a monopoly on how this all is going to develop. But I think that's where the promise is. We're a little bit sometimes gloomy looking at the numbers, highest infant mortality rate, highest, lowest life expectancy in Africa, in South Asia. But these are also areas may enjoy a new rural economy of some sort we're yet to figure out, right?
I'm going to take a very different spin on all of this, because in South Africa, what we're going through now is very, very different as well, because, what viewers and people have to understand is that South Africa has come 24 years into democracy. A lot happened during the apartheid years, and the issue of land and the redistribution of land is one that's a big topic back in South Africa. If we look at numbers, only 8 million hectares of arable land has been transferred back to black people, and we're talking 8% out of 82 million hectares. And we hear the benefits of this land in the rural areas. So Thando, from your perspective, how do we speed this up? How do we allow South Africans to get that land to create a living for themselves?
Firstly, maybe the first comment I would like to make is people are flocking into urban areas because it's true that there are better amenities, access to health, access to education. I think life is better in the urban areas in general, and experience has shown that the more urbanized countries are, the more prosperous they become. But yes, it's true, the rural areas, particularly for South Africa, which has double-digit unemployment, agriculture is one of the most labor-intensive sectors of the economy that we should take, of course, advantage of. But the issue of land redistribution remains an intractable one. Of course, our government still has a 30% target, which has been very difficult to reach, because private owners of land sell it to government at very high prices. And it's an ongoing debate, but irrespective of that, of non-movement forward in terms of transfer of land, there is still land for cultivation in rural areas. It's true that the government should be promoting people to at least a small scale to medium scale level of farming in rural areas could make life, I think, affordable in rural areas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Niawazi. We're coming to the end of this very interesting discussion. Leanne, what are you going to take away from this discussion?
I think so much. I don't even know where my mind is going right now, but I think as a country, and I refer to South Africa, the lessons that we've learned here today are massive. South Africa is sitting in a very difficult situation. Statistics are showing that half of our population are living in poverty, and it's not getting better, it's getting worse. So we're getting further and further away from those MDG goals, and that's a problem. But I think the lessons that have been put on the table here are things that we need to use, and we need to put them in play, because that could better the lives of people. And I thank you for this.
Thank you very much for coming over and sharing with us the story. My take is that I think, first of all, China needs to show more solidarity with its developing fellow countries. And secondly, we still have a long way to go. I mean, $1.9 a day, that is not a lot. So even if there are a lot of people coming out of poverty line, how to really improve their life is still a very big task.
We need to do this again.
Yes. So come back again next year?
It's a date. I'll be here.
Okay, thank you very much for watching this special production brought to you by CGTN and SABC. You can watch the replay on our application called the CGTN Live, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. You can follow me on Facebook or Twitter using the handle The Point with LX.
All right, that's it from us. Thank you very much for watching. If you missed this episode, you know you can catch it online, SABC News' website, as well as the YouTube channel. It'll be there for you to enjoy and to learn. Thank you to our studio guests, and of course to our wonderful panelists, and for China for being such great hosts.
Thank you very much for coming over.
Absolute pleasure.
Yeah. Okay, see you again.
Bye-bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
I also want to thank Slasher for making me the man that I am, giving me the opportunity to believe in myself and to believe that my dream can be possible.
In Western and Central Europe, but also in the north of Europe, about 10% of the population is having the energy poverty as a problem.
Giving charity is not an ideal way to help farmers to end poverty. The best way is to help them to integrate into the global commercial chain system.
Poverty is not an accident like slavery. It is man-made and can be removed by the actions of the human beings.